Next up, we have Kyle Hamilton, the safety out of Notre Dame, who, for me at least, was a pretty interesting player to watch, as I didn't actually do my evaluation of him until after the combine. So he's been a guy that I've seen from afar kind of go up and down here this draft cycle quite a bit in terms of, pre-combine. It seemed like everybody was saying, like, oh, this guy is arguably the best player in the draft, right? And then next thing you know, he runs a 4.59 40, and the only words you've heard, about him since, in the month and a half since, have been, oh, he's too slow. And it's just interesting how that works. We'll just say that. So I wanted to finally dive in though and see for myself, like, is he actually, somebody that people have, I don't want to say slept on, because he has been at the top of the process the whole time, but is he somebody that people are wrongfully slipping on now, right? So that's what I wanted to see. And I actually think maybe the people who had him as the top player in the draft were the ones who were wrong, in all honesty, which sounds kind of negative, but as you can see on the screen, I still have Kyle in the first round, albeit closer to the middle and end of it than at the top, which, we'll get into some of the reasons and potential reasons for that as we get going here, but he's an interesting evaluation, no question. So to address the speed off the bat, actually watching his film, I didn't have as big a problem with the pure straight line speed as many people seem to have. I thought, like, when it came to just accelerating and running, I thought he was perfectly fine, actually. And I thought he looked faster than a 4.59 at times. To me, where the real issue was, and actually if you do a little bit of a deeper dive into the combine numbers, I think this shows it was the change of direction ability and the ability to accelerate out of a break. And that was, to me, where he was getting exposed, particularly in coverage at times, even when the ball wasn't thrown his way. For some godforsaken reason, Notre Dame was lining him up on slot receivers at times, and I mean, they were just shimmying him to death, it felt like. And then you look at that combine number for the shuttle, and he had a 4.32, which is in the bottom 42% of any safety who's ever ran the shuttle at the combine. And you kind of see, like, oh, okay, maybe the agility's the problem more so than the pure speed. Because yeah, if I was a team that's drafting Hamilton, I would not be putting him one-on-one on islands with with Deebo Samuel, for instance. I would much rather take my chances with him head up on, I guess if we're continuing with the San Francisco example, I'd rather have Hamilton on George Kittle, no question. You know what I mean? Like, put him on the big body tight end where he can sort of show off the size and frame that he has, and then maybe the speed will look like less of an issue. The agility will look like less of an issue. At Notre Dame, there were a lot of times when it looked like an issue, I'll be honest. And in that regard, yeah, I gave him a 5.5 out of 10 on quickness and change of direction ability. That was his lowest grade of mine by a pretty sizable margin. Another low grade kind of off the back of that, as I somewhat alluded to, was the coverage skills. I thought he was fine in zone coverage. He looked decently comfortable and fluid, in space at times. But the man coverage to me just wasn't quite there. So I gave him a 14.5 out of 20. But, you could say if he's going to be more of a strong safety or that new age sort of Derwin James style safety where you're just floating around and doing a little bit of everything, I don't necessarily know if that's the biggest worry in the world. Oh, I can't man cover a slot receiver, but I didn't get to see a lot of them on tight ends or running backs, right? We just didn't see it. It just didn't really happen that much. And in that regard, maybe I went a little bit too low, but then you could say, well, maybe you went a little bit too high and these tight ends would have cooked him too. And then that's a worry as well. In terms of some of the other grades that I gave him a 14.25 out of 15 on his ability in run support and tackling. One thing I did want to note, though, about the tackling is that his pursuit angles at times can be a little bit risky. I'll just say that. That was one of the, not necessarily negatives, but one of the sort of negatives with a question mark that I wrote on my sheet, as it always seemed like he was like taking a very tight angle and a very shallow angle at guys where, he's either going to get them by their like ankles and their calves, or he's just going to miss on them. And I would say like 8 out of 10 times he was bringing them down, or at least getting guys out of bounds. But at the next level, I just would much rather him take a safer angle. You know, when you're coming from 10 yards away, give up an extra yard if it means you get the guy down. You know, it felt like he was being a little bit unnecessarily risky there, and that's why I took a little bit off in terms of just the tackling grade in general. I gave him an 8.25 out of 10 in IQ and awareness. I thought he generally had a good idea for what was going on, whether it was coverage or against the run. There were just times where I didn't think he could do much about it. You know, there's times where it's zone coverage, and it looks as though like he clearly sees, oh, I should be passing this guy off and sinking onto this guy, and then it's like, well, the QB is able to fit the ball in there because you weren't able to change directions fast enough. But I see you trying, so I didn't want to double deduct him in that regard. So I gave him a rather high IQ and awareness grade, like I said, a little bit lower on coverage. In terms of block shedding, now that's an interesting category. I gave him an 8, which seems a little bit high because we didn't get to see a ton of it, but just going by safety standards sort of in the NFL, he's a rather large guy. He played rather aggressively when he was attacking downhill, so maybe that's more of a projection grade than anything else. Because he was physical at the point of attack when that was asked of him, but there were very few instances where it was him engaged one-on-one with a lineman or a tight end or a wide receiver, mainly because a lot of the snaps, like I said, they were kind of playing him 12, 13 yards off the ball, and he was more of that third level run defender than a sort of second level run defender, which is kind of what I expect out of him at the next level if he's going to be more of that sort of in the box safety, if that makes sense. One area that I did give him a really good grade that I'm not sure if people necessarily were giving him enough credit in, because I saw a lot of people thought his coverage was not good, and understandably so, but the ball skills I thought were rather impressive. Of the 6 games I watched, there were maybe only 1 or 2 without a pass deflection or an INT, and not necessarily the most impressive in terms of the plays themselves, but I did think that the hand-eye coordination, the ability to just pluck the ball out of the sky or bat the ball away, the timing required to do that, I thought that was all rather impressive. And then last but not least, in terms of just my general size and athleticism grades, I gave him a 5 on size, 3.75 on athleticism. So you could argue that one is maybe a little bit too high, the athleticism, but then you look at some of the other tests and it's like, okay, he had a 38-inch vertical, right? Like, this thing could probably windmill dunk if you wanted to. So it's tough to say when I'm just making that more of a broad combine pro day type grade, it's tough to say, oh yeah, you're a 2, and that's how people are kind of talking about him. And that's why I think it's a little bit unfair what's happened to him just off the back of that one score. Because my problems with him aren't really that one score. It's 6 games of tape, and I saw you get exposed by slot receivers way more than I wanted to. And I shouldn't even say exposed, because I think that just his level of talent made it so quarterbacks were looking away, if that makes sense. Right? Like you see, oh, there's Kyle Hamilton lined up against, our third best receiver, but Kyle Hamilton's, a potential future first-round pick, so we're going to go pick on the guy that hasn't even thought about making the league over on our wide receiver 2, right? So I think that there was part of that in terms of why QBs weren't targeting him as much. But when he was in space, in man coverage in particular, there were definitely some opportunities. But hopefully that's something he can improve on as he gets maybe more comfortable at the next level. And hopefully teams will use him in a more appropriate manner, I would say. Put him against some tight ends. Instead of, and then on other plays, instead of just putting him as that deep free safety and asking him to cover half of the field or, the entire back end of the defense as that deep drop guy, give him a more realistic role for sort of his athletic ability. Because, like, your deep free safeties, if you're playing cover 2, cover 3, whatever it necessarily is, like, they have to be able to not only cover a lot of ground initially with their athleticism, which I think he can do, but a lot of times QBs are looking in the opposite direction. Like, they'll look you off one way and then throw it the other. You have to have a guy who's a fluid enough athlete to be able to very quickly change directions and accelerate. And I thought that's where Kyle kind of struggled. It was the getting caught in no man's land when he maybe got looked off, or maybe there were 2 routes and he had to adjust from one to the other. Say there's a post and then a vertical, and He's kind of stalking the post, and then the QB throws the vertical. Well, he's kind of got to change directions a little bit and get out there. And I don't want to say it was poor, the job that he did, but there's just room for improvement, right? And I don't know what that necessarily looks like. He's only 21 years old, just turned it earlier in March, so that's definitely something to note on the positive end. But yeah, he's an interesting guy. I have him as a first-round player. Like I said, my grade is towards the bottom of the first round, but if I only have, say, 17 first-round picks or 17 first-round grades by the time the draft comes around, then yeah, I mean, if you take him 17, it is what it is. Like, that's something I always say is, like, I might grade harder than most people do, but 32 guys are going to be first round picks anyway, so that's obviously going to probably dip into some of my second round grades and other videos of players that you guys will be able to see here soon shortly. So in that regard, if you want to see those videos, make sure you guys subscribe, make sure you guys leave a like on this one, leave a comment. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on Kyle Hamilton, because like I said, I thought he was a really interesting player, a very solid player, with potentially a very high ceiling, although I'd like to see maybe a little bit more versatility in his game, because I think they were using him like that versatile chess piece at times. They were treating him like he was, say, Isaiah Simmons at Clemson, and I didn't quite think that he always had the juice to back that up, if that makes sense. But we'll see how he is treated in the NFL at his next team, because I definitely do think that regardless of all the, I feel like I've kind of talked negative about him, regardless of all that, I do think that he's the type of guy that could very easily be drafted and anchor the back end of your defense for, the next 8 years. You just maybe have to supplement him with someone that is perhaps a better athlete, right? Maybe you move him up into the box a little bit more on the back end. You get some speedster 4-3 that can change directions and at the drop of a hat, and now you got a real good combo going on, right? Kind of like what the Jets had, for example, with Jamal Adams and Marcus May. Maybe you need to double up on safety if you're going to take Hamilton to try and better cover up his weaknesses and really exude his strengths out on the field every Sunday. So with that being said, I've already went too long on this one. Apologies for that, guys. Hopefully I'll see you in the next video. I'm mic'd up, now I'm mic'ing out. Peace.